Technique in painting is the way that we visually communicate. Visual communication is that which we impose our own feelings, our own thoughts, our own imagination onto the viewer, okay? And it's important to have a solid foundation in classical painting if you want to create paintings. Now, you don't have to be a classical painter. You can be an abstract painter. You can be an impressionist, an expressionist, whatever kind of painter you would like. There are fundamental concepts to painting that are pretty much in it a little bit of everything, okay? To a Jackson Pollock, to a Caravaggio, to a Cezanne. There are universal fundamental truths, basically, within all of these painters and the way that they paint, okay? You don't necessarily have to be a realist painter to know the concepts involved in classical painting. Now, in today's episode, this is going to be the last stage of what I'm going to be calling Yupari's classical technique. And so this is going to be the last stage. The first stage was the underpainting, then it was the local color, then it was perceptual color, and then now we are in the selective render stage. Now remember, visual communication is very, very important, because what do you want to convey? What you want to convey is what is already within you. The art is within you. You don't need to search for it. You don't need to, sit there and tear your hairs out wondering, what is my art? What do I want to create? That's already within you. I think from birth we are already given a type of handwriting, and this is something that I think of as a signature. Each of us has our own signature. You can train so many different artists in the same kind of technique, and you will be able to differentiate what one artist does from another artist, and that is a signature. Each one of us has a signature. So on the palette here, we have titanium white, flake white, burnt umber, alizarin crimson permanent, cadmium red, yellow ochre, sap green, ultramarine blue, ivory black, and neo McGilp medium. And if you would like to know exactly what materials I'm using, or you would like to purchase the same type of materials that I'm using and contribute to this YouTube channel, I have the oil paints and some of the brushes typed up in the description box down below, as well as Amazon affiliate links. So if you click on those links, they will redirect you to the Amazon site where you can see individual products similar or exactly to those that I am using. And if you decide to purchase any of those paints or brushes, Amazon will pay me a small fee, so thank you in advance for that. So let's go ahead and mix up the color value web. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of neo McGilp medium, the alizarin crimson permanent, the ivory black. This is going to be our darkest dark of the color value web, a little bit of ultramarine blue. Now as we move up the color value web, we're going to use a combination of the cadmium red and the sap green. Yes, I'm using complementary colors just because they neutral out very nicely to create a nice and kind of a dark and rich flesh tone. So adding a little bit of burnt umber to that. Now a little bit of yellow ochre. So now we're walking our way towards the middle tone regions. So these flesh tones that I'm mixing up are going to be kind of closer to the pinkish family of the color value web. And now each color value web, you can tint it, okay? So you can tint it to assimilate your model's flesh tones, your model's skin complexion. So the model that we're painting today, Madeline, as you've seen in the previous episodes, has a little more of a pinkish flesh tone. So now we're going to venture off into the titanium white. Now see how much lighter we can make the flesh tones with the titanium white. And these colors are very much kind of like the local colors from the second stage of this process. And so what we're going to do is tint these colors based on those larger color relationships that we established in the previous stage of this painting. But that ought to do it for the flesh tone color value web. So I'm going to mix up two more. So I'm going to put this brush away. Let's see, how about this brush? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to mix up a warmer color value web. So here's a little trick, okay? So a little bit of the alizarin crimson permanent, the burnt umber, and then I'm just going to go right next to the color value web that I mixed up here. See how it's getting lighter and lighter automatically. That's going to be my warm color value web, and it's going to be kind of framing the flesh tone color value web. And now I'm going to want a cooler one, so the ivory black, a little bit more medium. So the ivory black, the ultramarine blue, and I'm going to do the same thing. See how I'm kind of framing the color value web? This is almost like a railroad. And this is going to be how I'm going to get the colors for the SClera. A little bit more titanium white, actually. Yep, so this is going to be how I get the colors for the SClera. So this portion right here is for the SClera. This is for the flesh tone, and then this is for the warmer colors, such as like the nostrils, the dark of the nostrils, or the lips, and such. So now I'm going to just get a smaller brush. How about 2 smaller brushes? And then I'm just going to pick a zone, or pick a plane, any plane, and then start to subdivide the shape. So how about we start off with the, let's start off in this value. And just before we get started, I have one more little analogy to make. So technique in painting is very similar, or you can think of it kind of like a training regimen or working out. If you're an athlete, imagine an athlete in any sport, okay? They need to have some kind of training to be in like physical shape to be able to make the maneuvers that they would be doing in their sport, whether it be football, soccer, or whichever kind of sport, okay? It takes a lot of training, and you have to maintain that training to be able to do what you're trying to do. In our case, we need to continue training in the classical technique, training in drawing and painting and understanding value and anatomy, to convey more clearly the type of works that we're trying to convey. And now another thing is that, as artists, we really have to work as hard as possible. And it's kind of a very peculiar place when you're an artist, especially when you're a very, very serious artist, and then you tell people, well, I have to get to work. And they're like, what? Well, I have to get to painting. Guess what? People are going to ridicule you, so you kind of have to have a strong backbone, especially if you are a painter. So like me, I tell my family, hey, I'm going to work now, meaning I'm going to paint. They laugh. I tell my friends or, family of friends, hey, I'm going to work. You're going to paint? Ha, ha, ha. See, that's the kind of thing. You have to have a strong backbone. You have to motivate yourself to get up every single day. You have to motivate yourself to be able to push forward in your technique. So how about we look at the eye to the left? So we're going to start off with the eye to the left of your screen. First thing I'm going to do though is oil out the painting. So I'm using the Neo McGill medium, and I'm applying the oil to the hair and the face. This does a number of things. Primarily, see how it's helping me get the original values back. These were the original values that we had when the painting, or when this layer, the perceptual color pass here was what? Okay, so now that we have covered what we need to cover with the Neo McGill medium, we're now going to jump into specific zones of value. So the first zone I'm going to look at, like I mentioned, is going to be the eye to the left of your screen. And very shortly here, I'm actually going to get the camera closer to the painting. So now with the selective render stage, you want to pick smaller planes. So now it's about smaller planes, and then describing the planes surrounding. So what we did, okay, is pick a plane, any plane. We started with this plane. So this is our very first plane that we're going to be solidifying in the selective render stage. And try to not drink so much coffee on the day that you're going to be doing the selective render. So my hand's kind of like, kind of shaky. But anyway, so now the values are going to start to drastically become lighter as we move up the plane here. And what we have is actually a very rapid curve, meaning that the values are transitioning rather quickly. So now what I'm going to do is move the camera closer. Now that you're in close-up, now you're going to see exactly how I delineate each one of these smaller plane changes. And the idea is to follow with the the colors that we established in the previous layers. So that is, this is a little bit pinker and it's a little bit less saturated. But I'm not trying to color match, so this is a very peculiar place to be in. That's why the layer before this I called the perceptual color pass, or should I say the perceptual color stage. Because in the perceptual color stage, the one before this, we were looking for spots of color in relations, so relating those colors to one another. And this is actually a clean and dry brush, and what I'm doing with this brush is basically softening the edges. So we really want to pick and choose what edges we want to be soft, what edges we want to be sharp, and which edges we want to fall basically in between. And in the selective render, you want to selectively render the areas of focus, the areas that you want to draw more attention to. And for me, it's definitely going to be the eyes. Secondary is going to be the nose, and then the mouth, and then the subtle tones around the cheeks, the cheekbone, and all that stuff. Primarily these areas here. And now there's a very peculiar thing to think about with the selective render that I'm going to talk about as I'm filling in this entire plane here. And yes, this is a very tedious process. It's much more conceptual than it is perceptual, meaning you really have to imagine yourself on the form. You have to imagine yourself. What I mean by on the form is literally like kind of like an explorer going all around these surfaces. So darker here. Okay, so what I was going to talk about is the fact that we are not trying to perfectly replicate the photograph. Now that's a very peculiar place to be when you're trying to make something look quote-unquote realistic. And what I'm actually doing is I'm applying my knowledge of form, so I know that this plane right here is getting a little bit darker, so this is actually going to be another subplane fitting within this larger plane here. So what I'm doing is I'm applying my knowledge of form. Okay, I just explained the concept that I was using there. I'm applying my knowledge of form, and I'm interpreting the visual information in front of me. You are literally seeing me now interpreting the visual information. Does it look like the photograph? No. Does it look kind of like the photograph? Probably. And then the key word is kind of. So like I was saying, each one of us, you have this too. All of us, we have a signature. And again, I don't mean a signature, like signing a painting or something like that. By signature, I mean each one of us has a very unique touch that we have. Like the way you will render the shapes within your paintings will follow the same concepts that I'm following, but your approach or the way that you apply the paint or what areas you select to to put into focus are going to be unique to you. And that's what I was saying. You don't have to go out chasing, you don't have to go out and chase your style. That style is already within you. As long as you understand the concepts involved in painting, you may choose to make some areas, more realistic than me. You may choose to make some areas less realistic and more showing more brush strokes, You might exaggerate some colors that I wouldn't exaggerate. I may exaggerate some colors that you wouldn't exaggerate, and it's all down to personality. And so what I'm doing is, again, with this very small brush, I'm looking at each individual form and I'm starting to close up the entire structure, okay? So we're going to continue to develop this upper eyelid, maybe move on to this lower eyelid and then a little bit of the sclera. I'm really going to try to make this a step-by-step kind of thing here. So now this edge is in question. That edge is a little bit too sharp. So I'm going to soften it. I'm going to soften it in comparison to this one. I want this area to come into focus more than this one. Now I'm going to move up the value range. Nope, much lighter. Alright, right over here. I'm realizing in this episode I'm giving a lot of advice. So maybe I'll probably title it something about it, giving advice as well. Alright, so now you're seeing that we're really starting to close up this area. And it's important not to make it too smooth. I'm actually not trying to make the form that smooth. The reason being is that our skin is not like marble. You know, human skin is not, you know, like perfectly smooth. And so I'm actually letting some of the layer underneath show through to give some kind of texture, and I think that will make it more, you know, dimensional. Now we're going to push this bottom plane here. And you want to think of the shape of the form, the boundary of the form. So this is literally at the boundary of the bottom of the form as it starts to turn all over. And I realize that this is very complicated, okay? I realize this. You know, it's not going to be completely clear in one video or even hundreds of videos. You have to practice this on your own. And I'm, you know, like I said, I'm doing some formal writing on this technique. But I'm also coming up with some self-teaching resources for you. So in the future, to accompany my daily show, I also want to have self-training, you know, self-training exercises that can help you, you know, study the fundamentals and apply the fundamentals. That's my goal, to be able to have this show every single day, provide something positive to your life, and to help you. And now I'm going to transition into the SClera color. Now I'm pretty much going to be using the same brush, the same little brush. So I'm going to use the SClera. So I'm going to use SClera Dark. So this is going to be very, very small. See that? Right in the corner there to start to turn. So that is what you would call a turning value, or just a halftone. But it's the halftone that's furthest away from us, okay? This one right here is turning all the way over. And the photograph does not make this very clear. It just doesn't. So we need to understand these concepts. That's why I think it's important to work from life as much as possible, and to study form as much as possible. There we go. See how we're starting to turn the form for the eye? And just be careful not to make anything too smooth. The eyes are an exception. The eyes themselves are really, really smooth. You know, the sclera, it's really, really smooth. So in a way, we're now thinking about texture, whereas these areas are not. You don't want to make them super, super smooth, because then it'll start to look digital. And there's nothing wrong with digital, okay? Don't get me wrong. It's just that if you make something completely smooth. It'll look like, you know, like in a 3D video game or something like that. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. You know, if that's your style, if that's your technique, then that's what you want to do. Now there's a smaller plane up here that's facing the light more than this one. And you don't have to do this with everything. Just the areas that you want to selectively render. The areas you want to bring to focus. And now we're putting in, this is like a little bridgeway plane. A bridge plane, bridging this form into this one. We're going to make this incredibly soft. And I have omitted the eyelashes. I don't know if I'm going to put in too many heavy eyelashes. And there's a perfect example of signature. You know, maybe you would want to put in, you know, the heavier eyelashes, whereas I don't. And that would be something that would differentiate how you would paint this versus how I would. Now a little bit lighter. And this is a very back and forth-ish kind of thing, so I'm probably going to continue, you know, maybe I'll go back into this and then go back into that. I'll tell you one thing though, I will have to work on this undertone for the eyebrow. See, underneath the eyebrow, there's actually a half tone. And it's a very soft one at that. You know, we can even put in more of a specific shape for the eyebrow too. See that, how the eyebrow is kind of turning in more over there. You can even fill in this little dark shape here. So now for the eyebrows, moment of truth. So I'm going to use the darker region of the color value web. I'm going to be very cautious with this. I'm thinning out the paint a little bit, so remember, thinner paint will stick onto thicker paint. Even though, you know, these areas are mostly dry, I still want to have a thinner application of paint. Even the eyelashes. Very little, okay? I just knew that it wouldn't look quite believable without some kind of glimpse of the eyelashes. And now this is a little too, you know, they look like stitches. So I'm going to soften the edges over here and over here. And then go at it again. Very careful not to hit the SClera. Okay. I think that's a little better, but now I see, now that I'm putting in that information, that I'm missing this bottom plane of the upper eyelid completely. And this is what I mean by selective render, okay? I'm not going to spend that much time in every area, though I could. And the important thing is to, at this point actually, to use a smaller brush, like what I'm doing here. Which is something is rare, something I would usually not say. I usually would say to use a larger brush, you know. And now we have a little top plane to the lower eyelid. So let's see, right over here. Very subtle. You ever look at a Bouguereau or, you know, like any, you know, highly realistic classical painting? This is probably very similar to how they would be thinking about it, okay? In terms of plane, this plane is very, this plane is facing the light quite a bit, but the nature of this color is not as bright as this one, okay? Now a photograph might flatten this and this, which our photo reference kind of is, but this wouldn't be quite as light. And now that I have that, one of the last things I'll do here is relate this angle. So I'm going to go ahead and get a darker value. And the photograph is distorting quite a bit here. So forget the photograph. I'm going to be using a straight line here. I'm actually going to get a brush to do this. Okay, let's see. There. All right. So I'm going to have to adjust this eye by that much, meaning that the tear duct is actually going to come down to here, this point here, which means this eye is going to have to be moved up the slightest bit, and by the slightest bit I mean almost nothing, almost a tiny. Okay, looking at this angle, the photograph is overdoing this angle. Don't trust the photograph, it's overdoing this angle. So now you see the type of changes that I'm going to have to apply to this eye, but you know, I'm not going to bore you with the same type of footage. So what I did with this eye, I'm going to do with this one, except I'm going to be moving this one up just a tiny bit because I was trying to compensate for the fact that I knew the photograph was overdoing it, but I kind of, you know, I messed up this angle here. And I'm using the shadow to show you this angle. After spending quite a long time, this is what we have now. So I did the same kind of stuff that you saw me do with this eye over here, minus the eyelashes. So let's just go ahead and put in the eyelashes. Now I don't want to put too much, and this kind of concerns me, just because this area is still wet. So I'm gonna be on the safe side with this. Just using whatever was in the darker region of the flesh tone palette, or of the color value web. As you can tell, I'm kind of tired. This actually took me most of the day, believe it or not. So I didn't realize that the selective render stage would take that much time. But then again, now I have some more reference to refer, or I have some more material to write in my book, okay? So then the eyelash is under here. And the selective render is really something that you don't want to rush. So that's why this episode is mainly about the eyes, or pretty much all about the eyes. You know, I never thought it would come to this, but I'm tired. I spent pretty much all day on the two eyes, and I know I might be at fault for using a small brush, but like I said, this is the selective render stage, and that's why in this technique, the technique that I'm going to call Yupari's classical technique, I'm going to refer to each step as a stage and not as a layer. So it's not the selective render layer, it's the selective render stage. Okay, so that means that I'm tired. I've done a lot of painting for the eyes. You know, we've studied the forms, we've studied some of the edges and all of that stuff in the eye to the left of your screen, and then I went ahead and did it to the eye on the right of your screen, and then kind of balanced between the two, and that took me the majority of the day. That being said, always remember, in a world that can be so negative, be the spark that ignites positivity amongst all of us. I do apologize that I couldn't make the selective render in one video. That is a very long process, so I'm going to be showing you the rest of the development of the selective render. And you know what I'm trying to do is make a much more much more realistic and naturalistic painting. That's really what I'm after. So like I always say, be positive. There's always so much negativity around us. You know, be the strong one, be the positive one, because positivity is contagious. If you're positive, the people around you are going to be positive, and we're all going to have a great day. That being said, I really do hope that you have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.